So I just finished watching the Amazing Atheist video called Humanity is Overrated, and it was basically a long rant about how terrible humanity is and how we're all doomed and there's war everywhere and that sort of thing. And it reminded me of a Bill Hicks joke where he says, the news is just apocalyptic, war, death, AIDS, famine, depression, war, and that's all that they talk about. And then he says something like, maybe Ted Turner just needs to get laid so we can finally get some good news. My point in bringing up this analogy to a Bill Hicks joke is that I think that, TJ, if I may speak to you sort of directly, I think that you two are sort of focusing exclusively on the negatives, and there's certain things that just don't make all that much sense about what you're saying. For example, you say, creation is hard, destruction is easy. Well then, looking at society generally, what does that actually tell us about the inclination of the average person? We have created more than we have destroyed. So, what does the majority of humanity put their effort towards? Creation or destruction, cooperation or antisocial behavior? I think that when you go out in your day-to-day life, you go to the store, there's bread that is, magically arrived there by people's own goodwill. People's goodwill and cooperation is so subtle that it underscores every aspect of your life and you don't even notice it. If people were malicious by nature, the whole system would just collapse instantly. You'd be walking down the street and somebody would try and run you down with their car for fun. There'd be no police officers because nobody would bother trying to enforce laws or justice or anything like that. There wouldn't be stores because everyone would just resort to looting and theft and murder and that sort of thing. The cooperative nature of the average person is invisible unless you look for it, but it's everywhere, and it informs the entire structure of society. Even people living under oppression find ways to live with a certain amount of dignity, to cope with their life, and that, in a sense, is even more inspiring than the fact that they are oppressed. And no, we got to do something about that, to see that human beings can, in fact, cope with even the worst situations. And while the geniuses and the great artists are the exception in our society, typically so are the people who are causing all the trouble. The violent murderers and sociopaths and the people causing war, they too are exceptions, although they have, they're on the opposite end of the spectrum of extremes. So you have the people like the regime in Syria, which is really, amounts to maybe what, I don't know, I don't want to put an exact figure on it, but a very small number of people oppressing an entire country and then people fighting against it, fighting against that regime. Saddam Hussein and his regime, it's a relatively very small group of people, or any king or tyrant throughout history is, the dictator or the king and his people loyal to him, who are a very small minority, the elite minority of a country, which is causing the wars, initiating the wars, oppressing the people, and that sort of thing. So, yes, this great geniuses and the artists, they are the rare exception, but so are the people who cause most of the major conflict. The majority of people, they just live their lives. They bake your bread, they package your bread, they drive your bread to the store, they ring you up at the cash register. And to not really give people credit as being overall cooperative for just making society run, especially in a country like America. It takes a massive amount of infrastructure and vast cooperation amongst millions of people to give you and I the sort of lives that we enjoy. And again, creation is hard, destruction is easy, and yet we create more than we destroy. So I think that should say pretty clearly what the inclinations of humanity are. The majority are cooperative, the minority are destructive, and finding the best way to deal with the antisocial, violent, destructive minority is really the solution, finding the solutions to the problems that you talk about. And given that the fact that the vast majority of people tend towards cooperation and social rather than antisocial behavior, I do think that that is actually possible. And so I think that this pessimistic view of the world really overstates certain factors while understating the vast wellspring of goodwill that makes day-to-day life bearable and function, and why there's not chaos in the streets, because the average person just goes about their life in a cooperative fashion, making sure that your bread gets to the store, and they're not getting any credit for it because they're not going above and beyond with these amazing displays of their own generosity or what have you. And I think that's really an unfair and biased and pessimistic view that just ignores just how society manages to continue and function, and why it does, and really instead just overstates all the worst aspects of humanity, which again are caused by the minority, in the same way that the great art and science is the product of a minority. That's my overall point of view, although I will say I don't necessarily have a totally optimistic or a totally pessimistic view, but I don't think that this totally one-sided, humanity sucks, look at the war and the tragedy everywhere, really, it doesn't address what is going on in the average life of most people on the planet. Warfare is sporadic and dispersed, and there's actually less violent conflict now than at many points in the past, although it's more destructive now because of modern technology and weapons and so forth. But yeah, my point is humanity is not that bad. That's all I have to say.